Hello and welcome to another video on the Catalyst channel. Today we're going to look at a web-based application for 3D modeling, can also do 2D design, called Spline. And I'll put a link to this down in the description down below. But essentially what this is, first off I'm going to say this is a non-sponsored video, it's just an application I found, it came across my Twitter feed and I thought that looks quite cool, so I'll have a play about it. It's basically an application to allow you to create interactive 2D and 3D elements for web pages. That can also work on mobile phones using OpenGL and HTML5. What I have on screen at the moment, you may notice it's a little bit stuttery, that's just the Mac, that's not actually anything to do with the design or how the application works. It actually works super smooth if you have a very good machine and good internet connection. Also because I'm recording, it does kind of cause my machine to stutter a little bit more than it would normally. But what we have here is, if you're familiar with my channel, I have my robot I've used before in 2D animation tutorials. And if I was to click this little play button here, we have this interactive robot that is going to look where my mouse is and try and follow it. I can pan around my scene by holding my Alt or Control option button. His arms are interactive, so they will actually, when I put my mouse over them, they will move. And when I'm moving my mouse away, I'll return to its starting position. So it's very simple, very, very rudimentary. What I've done here is nothing, amazing. If I press A on my keyboard, I can actually get to start doing a little hovering animation where it goes up and down. And these are just looping animations, as you can sort of see, for things like the mouth, the little antennae, and these little lightning bolts. Let's just close that. And just so you can see how many objects was used to create this, we have the head, which is actually should be renamed the body, because that's actually everything. We have various groups for each part of it, each of the arms, for the body, the head, everything. It's just so many elements. We're not going to go into how this was created because it took a good hour to 2 hours to make and it's still not perfect. So let's just come back out of this. When you actually first open it up, you're shown a library of assets or scenes that I've already created or examples to kind of get you started. I'm just going to go to my files and create a new file, like so. Here we go. And when you're greeted with a new scene, you basically just have a directional light and a rectangle. So if I click into the ether, so into this black abyss here, you'll notice over here, this is my properties panel. And I have options to change things like the frame, so the background. So I could change this to be kind of like a nice pastely blue. I can also make it transparent, the exact opposite, by just putting the slider down to the bottom. I'm going to keep a color just so I can see what I'm doing. Size, this is where we can adjust our frame size. So again, depending on how you're going to export this, like I said, it's built for web design, for embedding into iframes or into web-based apps. You could choose a frame to kind of conform your scene and work and make sure your elements are framed within that window correctly. I'm just going to keep it as responsive for the time being. Global settings, again, pretty self-explanatory. Snapping, whether things snap to a grid or snap to each other. Orbit, whether when we hold our Option or Alt button, when we pan around, whether it's sort of smooth or more jaggedy. Helpers, so this is just again kind of little tips that kind of help us where we're going to align things. Collaborators, now this is something I'm just going to quickly go over. Spline actually allows you to collaborate with other people, so you can actually work together. Basically one person's a host and they invite other users and they can work together on building their own 3D models or mock-ups, which is actually quite cool. So you can see you have a custom app, you send that app or email link to other people and then they can join in and work on this scene together. Post-processing, so these are effects, so we can actually have our models pixelated, have chromatic aberration, bloom, brightness, vignettes, etc. Again, not going to go over much of that. Same with fog. And one thing I am going to go over though is down here is we actually have a thing called material assets. So one thing I kind of learned the hard way is when I was building my scene, I didn't quite realize that I could actually, instead of having to create a new material for each of my objects, I could just create a material over here and then pull from that material from my library at any point, and it would just sort of just be there. It basically was a quicker way of grabbing materials or textures without having to do it per element. So that is just a quick time saver that I kind of wish I picked up on earlier. I don't know why that's not updating, but it should. Lighting, this is where again you can change things like style of lighting, whether you want to have a cartoony look or physical look. So again, physical would act more like reflections would work more correctly with lighting and act as if it's a real world item, for example. And then last, I'm not going to go over color assets because it's the same as material. Image assets. So another thing that you can do is you can actually upload images from your machine. So let's just upload this image here, and then you can select your objects. Let's say I'm going to select this rectangle. I'm going to scroll down to my material. I'm going to go to where it says color. I'm just going to change this color to an image. I could actually just click on the plus button here to add another element, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to press this little X to get rid of that. There we go. On my image now, you can see we have a library of prefabs, but I can also select images that I've uploaded. So you can see how you could import your own images, and because it's a rectangle or a plane, it's only going to show up on the one side on this instance. Now I'm just going to delete that, and I'm going to start with absolutely nothing. So I don't know what I'm going to create. I'm probably not going to create anything amazing. I'm probably just going to create, I think I'm going to create like a kind of keyboard sort of thing. So I'm up here at the top. This is our toolbar. This is where we add our elements. So we can either add rectangles, cubes, spheres, text, or draw with a pen. So we can actually use a pen tool to create points, and then that will make us a shape. We'll look at all that in a second. Or you can create a new object, and this gives you more options like pyramids, lights, and prefabs again. I'm just going to go with the default for the time being. Just going to add a rectangle to my scene. And again, if you're familiar with any 3D modeling programs, none of this should be that surprising, but you have these little handles. We have our handles to move on the X and Y axis. We have our Z axis, which is the blue one. We have our rotate handles. We have our scales on each of the axes, like so. If we hold shift as we do it, we can scale everything or move everything proportionately, like so. But also all these controls are when we've got the object selected, they're also available over here in the properties panel, because again, like most applications, it's contextual, so it changes to what it is you're doing, which is just, perfect. To be honest, let's just reset everything to 0, 0, 0. There we go. I can also open this properties panel, for example, change the corners, so I can start to smooth edges, and if I want to make them even smoother, I can increase the number of corner sides, although this will start to put more demand on your system. And remember, if you're exporting this for web to be embedded on a website, you don't really want the end user to kind of have a terrible experience. You want it to be kind of smooth and efficient. So again, you want to avoid having too many complex elements in your scene. So let's just quickly make our keyboard base. I'm going to remove these smoothness and just add a slight shafting to it. There we go. A little one. There we go. So it's got a slight curve, but nothing amazing. Scroll this down. So this is going to be our kind of base for our keyboard. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on the cube, and if I mouse over, because I've got little helpers on, I can click on here. This will now add another cube to my scene. And what I want to do is I actually want to have this key cut into this one. So the way I do this is I select the two objects. So hold shift over here in my window of what's in my scene, click on the two, and with the two objects selected, you'll see that this property window again changes, and we now have a Boolean modifier. So we have intersect, we have kind of, well, this is a kind of cut from each other, this is a kind of intersect each other, and this is a merge. Let's go with the first one. And now you'll see that we have a new Boolean with these two cubes selected. If I select my top cube, so cube 2, and drag it down, you can see how it is cutting into my first cube. And I could actually have it cut all the way through to make a hole, like so. But I just want it to have a slight embed. And now I'm going to drag another cube. So click on my cube tool, click back in here, line this back up with where that hole I've just made was. Let's make the corners a bit smoother. Scale it down. So I'm going to press the lock button here, scale it down proportionately. So let's say 0.75 or something. And then move this down. Let's make it a bit bigger, so let's actually make it more like 0.85. Scale the top down. So we can see we kind of have the startings of what could be a key on a keyboard. Again, just to make your life easier, down here you have this kind of viewport snapping thing where you can kind of snap between views, or you can always manually rotate. We have perspective, so this is more kind of akin to sort of as if we're looking at something with our human eye, so a 3D perspective. Orthographic typically is more like looking at something on a piece of paper, so more 2D. Isometric, so again this is looking at things from an angle, so it's normally a kind of top corner looking down into a cube kind of perspective. And again, like we've got this key here, we can change material, so let's go to our color. Let's just make this a kind of, I don't know, let's make this a pink keyboard, something really garish, and we'll make the key cube here, we'll make this another color, we'll make this a bit of a darker pink. So here we have our cube, we have our other cube here. Let's say I now want this cube here to kind of have some animation to it. So selecting my cube, you notice over here in our properties panel we have two things at the top, one called states, one called events. If we click on the plus button next to states, our base state is the initial perspective, initial view of it. So this is the shape as we've created by default. And the new state, so state, this one here, it's just called state. This is our secondary state. So the way this works is, if you think of things like After Effects or keyframes in general, and you have, this is what it looks like at point A, and this is what it's going to look like at point B, and it transitions, whatever changes I do from point A version to point B will transition between the two. So let's say I'm just going to make this transition to be color. We'll go from pink to green. So at base state it's pink, at state 1 let's say it's green, and I click play. You notice nothing happens. That's because we need a trigger. So we go to events, we click on this plus button here, and let's say the trigger is when we mouse hover over this cube, we want the state to change to state 1 from the base state. And I'm going to click play. So it's pink, mouse over, it goes green, and it should return back to how it was before, so it'll cycle, like so. If I click on these buttons here, I can just kind of style that it eases in as well, and then press play. I mouse over it now, I move away, and it will now constantly loop in and out of pink and green because I've enabled these settings here. Can increase things like duration, delay. Let's make it a mouse down. So that makes more sense. So when I click on this, it's now activated into state 1. So this is a repeat as well, so there we go. Some other things we can do is, if we don't want it to just kind of change color, let's say we want it to conform shape, I'll go back into state here, and anything I do to this shape here will conform. So let's say I want this to go kind of up in the air like this. So again, click on it, and now it will conform, change color, and change shape. And I can do this to make it from a cube into a kind of oval. So you can see how you can change it on there. Let me just check the base state, because I think that's actually changed that. Okay, so it won't let me actually adjust the corner from one state to another, so that's just something to bear in mind. Another thing is, if we've got a cube here, we can actually adjust and start to deform the shape. So if I have my cube selected over here in shape, and I go to smooth and edit, this will generate us our let's move over here. So this is where we can see our kind of polygons, for lack of a better word. So you can choose things like choosing the faces, where we choose the sides or the vertices. And what we can do here is we can do things like, let's say I choose this face here, I want to go to extrude, and I can now just extrude this face. Likewise with this one. I can also intersect, so if I go to inset A and then do this, and I can do inset again. Let's see if this behaves the way it should. Yeah. So we can insert a shape into another by clicking on the little round circle here and having the shape selected, and now I can kind of, you see, deform my shape as I see fit. Loop cuts, so this is again where I can create a kind of edge wherever I choose. Likewise, there's also one for within the middle of a cut. Dissolve, so I can dissolve edges, so that's got rid of that line there and merged it together, so it's kind of now tapered it a little bit. But the kind of most cool one, I suppose, is actually the sculpt tool. So if I click on the sculpt tool here, this now, you notice that all the edges have gone, the kind of vertices have disappeared. We now have this kind of, it now acts like clay. So using this first tool here, I can click and drag on these edges. Oop. Click and drag. It's kind of conforming the way I wouldn't, not the way I'd expect it to. It's kind of pushing it in, so it's a little bit odd there. We can draw. So this is a kind of like an inflate almost. We can draw clay, so we can add to our shape. So this is adding more substance. So now if I go back onto here, let's see if we can adjust our brush size. So I press shift and I use my mouse wheel. I can then adjust my brush size, make it more or less. I don't quite get why that's doing that. Let's see, is it a case of holding? Nope. It's just not quite behaving the way it should anyway. Let's just ignore that. The other tool here is smooth, so I can smooth out my edges. So again, if I've got anywhere that's starting to look a bit rough, press the smooth tool, and it just smooths it all out like that. So you can see now it's generated new vertices and faces. And then now I can always just edit these. So if I go to here, this is where I can choose things like whether I want things fitted, holes flattened or fixed. wherever I want things to adjust the painting. So again, I can use the paintbrush now to select multiple faces. And I can still kind of click and drag these handles, so exactly the same as we would if it's just a standard shape. And then to confirm all that, I just press the exit modeling tool, and now my new weird shaped kind of teapot model is made. I'm just going to undo all that just so we can look at the next thing to look at as part of this deep dive sort of insight video, I suppose. So as you can see, we can kind of have it so we can change the color, deform the shape. If you look here, we've got various options, so you can mouse down, scroll wheel, have it follow. So if I have it on follow, for example, the object will just follow my mouse, which could be quite good if you want to kind of have a personal cursor on your scene. I'm just going to reset that, like so. And you're just basically building up like this. You're basically adding objects, you're taking away from each other. The pen tool, just to quickly go over that, we can create these points. And if we hold shift, when we have snapping on, we can actually have it so the points stay together. If you want to do a curve, you have to add a point in the middle like so. Then you go to your curve tool here, click on the point that you want to add the curve to, and now you can drag these handles to create the curve. I'm just going to quickly adjust my rotation on all this, so it's because I'm drawing it on a kind of in 3D perspective, so it's not quite aligned as you'd expect. And we'll just move this object up. So I'm going to come out my pen tool, move this up, and just adjust these positions. 0, 0, 0, 0. So as you can see, because I drew this in an isometric view, it's drew my points like so. The better way I would personally recommend actually doing this, if you're using the pen tool, is to do it in a kind of orthographic head-on view or top-down view, or whatever side it is you want to draw it. Just because that way everything kind of conforms to the perspective that you're in. Let me just come back at that for a second because I've just realised the snapping's not on. So turn snapping on, go back to my pen tool, draw my shape, get this. If I hold shift, I see this red line, so it's going to snap it to those edges. Exit my pen tool, and now I have my 2D shape. And because the default lighting's on, you'll notice that things like shadows are being cast. But what I can do is, if I create a 2D shape, I can extrude this using the extrusion tool here. And you can still add things like bevels. And this is a way of creating kind of more elaborate custom shapes if you don't want to do the Boolean cutting in and adding method. And this is the way it was for a while, actually, before the recent updates. Cloner, if we turn the cloner tool on, and we'll set this to be linear. This basically is how I did the mouth of my robot. So I had one rectangle, then I used the cloner tool to just group them along. And you can adjust things like the position. So let's say we want to bring them closer together. We can just change these values here to bring them closer together or spread them further apart. You can even make it so each copy, let's just reduce this so you can see, each copy rotates itself each time a new copy is generated. So you can see you can kind of create, again from one shape, start to create more complicated objects. And if you want to make something appear or disappear, then the way you do it is under the states, you just make a duplicate second state, and you make the second state the color. The second value here is opacity, you make that 0. So that's how you make things transition between appearing and disappearing. So this is just kind of wanted just to show you this as a kind of quick look at a tool that, again, you may not be aware of. I think it's really cool. I think it's still got a bit of a way to go. But when you kind of finish a scene, you could just simply click export. This generates a URL and an embed. So this embed is your iframe, so you could copy this into your own website, for example, and then it would just work as a player within that. So all your controls and everything, animation you've done here would still work the same. We can adjust things like whether the user can actually orbit or control what the user can do. Because this is built on HTML5 and OpenGL, it also works on phones, but just bearing in mind, obviously, the limitations of a phone. So anything that you press as a key press won't work, for example, because you don't have a keyboard present necessarily on a phone when you're looking at a web page. You can adjust limits. You can have an animated turntable, so let's just turn it on and just press update there. I'm just going to copy this URL so we can actually preview it in a second. This is also where you can choose your camera, for example. Let's just come back at that. Over here on this drop down, this is where you can actually duplicate objects, rename things, toggle the UI on or off, reset the camera. So all your options are here to set. Again, standard as with most programs. Library. This is just a library of assets that you can drag into your scene. So if you don't want to make something yourself, you can source it from a library of other people's work. Likewise with scenes, you can actually just open scenes up from the library. These are all, again, generated by, I believe, the community and Spline themselves. But the thing that's I think quite useful here is actual saving the file to local, and that generates a .spline file. So, for example, if your internet was to go down or it didn't save something or something got corrupted, you can have a copy, upload that copy back into the Spline website, and you get back the state you're at. So because it's all saved online, just bear in mind, every change you do is kind of permanent unless you press Command C or Control Z to undo, which you can do. But yeah, it's using a lot of memory. I know my Mac is not liking this. That's the end downside of using a Mac, by the way. Like a laptop, you want to really do this, like I said, on a desktop with a stable internet connection. So I've copied that web address. I'm just going to go to a new window, paste this in, like so. And this should open up my table on. It's just going to rotate automatically, but I can still, as you saw there, click on my mouse on this button here and make it change shape and appear. And also in this view, I can still rotate things around and zoom in, zoom out, everything that you would expect. So, like I said, this is just a kind of very quick preview at a web-based tool. So it's app.spline.design, and I think it's great for kind of making simple 3D elements to put into your web page. So remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you again very soon. Goodbye.